The fever hit me like a freight train on a Tuesday evening in late January. My body trembled uncontrollably, sweat soaking through my shirt and undershirt as I gripped the armrest of Stella's couch with white knuckles. Every joint in my 72-year-old body ached with a deep, bone-grinding pain that reminded me of the arthritis that had been creeping up on me for years. My head pounded so hard I could barely keep my eyes open, and the room spun in dizzying circles whenever I tried to stand or even shift my position. I'd been a schoolteacher for 40 years, teaching 7th grade English and seen countless sick kids drag themselves to class, but I'd never personally felt anything like this level of misery. Todd walked past me twice without a single word, his eyes cold as winter steel, not even glancing my way or asking if I needed anything. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I managed to croak out through my parched throat. "Could you get me some medicine? Maybe just a glass of water? Please." He stopped in his tracks, turned slowly like a predator sizing up wounded prey, and that's when I saw the smirk spread across his face. "You're more trouble than you're worth, old man." The words hung in the air between us like poison gas. Before I could even process what he meant or respond, Todd's hand clamped around my upper arm with shocking, deliberate force. His grip was like iron, strong fingers digging deep into my flesh hard enough to leave dark purple marks that would last for days. "Come on, you need somewhere quiet to rest," he said, his voice taking on a falsely sweet tone that made my skin crawl with instinctive dread. My legs barely worked as he pulled me roughly from the couch, my body swaying dangerously with each unsteady step. He guided me forcefully toward the basement door, which I'd only been down once before, when helping Stella store Christmas decorations last year. The stairs descended into cold, oppressive darkness, concrete walls closing in around us like the walls of a tomb or prison cell. The temperature dropped at least 20 degrees as we went down, maybe more. Cold, damp air rushed up to meet my feverish skin, making me shiver violently despite the fever burning inside me. He flicked on a bare bulb dangling from a wire that cast harsh, unflattering shadows across the unfinished space, revealing cardboard boxes and old furniture scattered haphazardly across the rough concrete floor. Then came the slam of the heavy metal door and the unmistakable click of a lock turning with mechanical finality. The sound echoed in my ears like a death sentence being read aloud in an empty courtroom. I stood completely frozen in the dim, yellowish light, staring at the locked door in complete and utter disbelief. This had to be some kind of terrible mistake, some awful misunderstanding that would be cleared up any moment. Surely Todd wouldn't actually lock his wife's elderly father in a cold, damp basement. That would be insane, criminal even. I called his name repeatedly, my voice hoarse and weak from the fever that was burning through my body. Nothing but heavy, oppressive silence answered me from the other side of that locked door. Minutes crawled by like hours, each one feeling longer than the last. Then a full hour passed according to my watch. The concrete floor radiated penetrating cold through my thin house shoes, chilling my feet until they went completely numb and I couldn't feel my toes anymore. My fever made everything feel surreal and disconnected from reality, like I was trapped in some terrible nightmare I couldn't wake from no matter how hard I tried. But the damp smell of mildew filling my nostrils with every breath, the deep ache spreading through my bones like fire, the painful scratch of my dry throat when I tried to swallow all confirmed this was horrifyingly, undeniably real. My own son-in-law, the man my daughter Stella had married just 2 years ago in a beautiful ceremony I'd helped pay for, had deliberately imprisoned me in my daughter's basement like some kind of animal. The realization settled over me like ice water being poured down my spine, and for the first time in decades, since the night Margaret died, I felt genuinely, deeply afraid for my life. The first night trapped down there was the longest night of my entire life, and I'd lived through plenty of long, difficult nights over 72 years. I found a moldy, musty-smelling blanket stuffed in a cardboard box and wrapped it around my violently shaking body, but it did almost nothing against the basement's bone-deep, penetrating cold. The fever climbed steadily higher as the dark hours passed, making me delirious, confused, and disconnected from reality. I kept thinking about my wife Margaret, how she'd been gone 6 years now after the cancer took her piece by piece over 18 terrible months. What would she say if she knew where I'd ended up, locked in a basement by our daughter's husband? She'd always had private reservations about Todd from the moment Stella introduced him. Said something about him felt fundamentally off in a way she couldn't quite explain, but I'd foolishly dismissed her concerns as just protective maternal instincts working overtime. Now I desperately wished I'd listened to her warnings, taken them seriously instead of brushing them aside. I tried shouting again and again until my throat was raw, pounding on the heavy door with both fists until my hands went completely numb and my voice gave out entirely, reduced to a painful whisper. But the house above remained frustratingly, maddeningly silent except for the muffled sound of the television playing some sitcom with canned laughter. Nobody came to check on the noise. Nobody heard my desperate, pleading cries for help. I was completely invisible to the world above, like I'd ceased to exist. By the time morning light finally filtered weakly through a tiny, grimy basement window, my throat was raw and bleeding from hours of screaming into the void. By the time weak morning light finally appeared, my throat felt like sandpaper coated in broken glass and rusty nails, and my stomach cramped violently with hunger pangs. I'd had nothing to eat or drink since yesterday afternoon before the fever hit, nearly 20 hours ago by my calculation. The fever left me so profoundly weak I could barely stand upright, without leaning heavily against the cold, damp concrete wall for support. My legs felt like rubber, unreliable and shaky. Around noon, according to the weak light coming through that small window, I finally heard footsteps approaching from above. The lock clicked loudly in the silence, and Todd appeared at the top of the wooden stairs with a tray balanced in his hands. He descended slowly, deliberately, taking his time like he was enjoying my desperate anticipation of food and water. On the tray sat stale bread, probably 3 or 4 days old and rock hard, and a single glass of cloudy, questionable-looking water. He set it on the dirty floor like I was some kind of stray dog, not even bothering to make eye contact with me. "This'll keep you alive for now," he muttered with complete indifference, like he was discussing the weather. I begged him desperately to let me go upstairs, to at least tell Stella I was sick down here and needed proper help and medicine. My voice cracked with desperation and humiliation. He leaned close, invading my space, his breath hot and stale on my face, and whispered with genuine malice dripping from every word. "She doesn't need to know anything about this. You're just a burden she's too nice to admit she wants completely gone from her life." That evening around 6 o'clock, right on schedule, I heard Stella's familiar voice upstairs, bright and cheerful as she came home from her demanding job as a nurse at the hospital downtown. My heart exploded with desperate, overwhelming hope that almost hurt physically. I screamed her name until my voice cracked and broke completely, then started frantically banging on the water pipes running along the low basement ceiling with both fists, ignoring the pain. The metallic clanging echoed loudly through the confined concrete space, surely loud enough to carry upstairs through the old floorboards. Surely she'd hear that distinctive noise and wonder what was making it, come down to investigate. But within seconds, before I could even catch my breath, the television volume suddenly blasted much louder, drowning out every sound I made with some action movies, explosions, and gunfire. Through the old, warped floorboards above my head, I heard Todd's laugh clearly, casual and cruel, like he was enjoying a private joke at my expense. My daughter was right above my head, probably just 12 or 15 feet away, close enough to touch if the floor wasn't between us, completely unaware that her father was trapped below her feet, sick and desperate and afraid. The realization crushed something fundamental inside my chest, something that felt like it might never heal. I slid slowly down the rough wall and wept openly for the first time since standing at Margaret's grave 6 years ago, my body racked with sobs. I knew then with absolute, crushing certainty that Todd wouldn't show any mercy or suddenly change his mind about this situation. I had to think strategically and carefully, had to use my brain the way I used to teach my 7th grade students back when I was still working, break down the problem into smaller, manageable parts, identify available resources no matter how limited, find creative solutions using whatever you have. I searched methodically through the dusty cardboard boxes scattered around the unfinished basement, looking for anything that might possibly be useful for escape. Most contained old clothes that smelled strongly of mothballs and water-damaged books with pages stuck together by moisture and mold. Then, buried under a heavy stack of yellowed magazines from the 1990s, I found an old red metal toolbox covered in rust and cobwebs. Inside were rusty nails of various sizes, a broken screwdriver with a badly cracked plastic handle, and a wire coat hanger bent completely out of its original shape. My hands trembled from fever and weakness as I carefully straightened the metal hanger, bending it slowly and deliberately into a shape that might possibly pick the simple lock mechanism on the door upstairs. It was a desperate long shot, something I'd only seen in movies, but it was something tangible to try, some action I could take. Just as I finally reached the door and carefully inserted the makeshift lockpick tool into the keyhole, heavy footsteps suddenly thundered down the wooden stairs with alarming speed and obvious anger. Todd caught me crouched awkwardly by the lock, the bent coat hanger clutched in my shaking hand, and his face instantly twisted with pure, uncontrolled rage. "Trying to ruin everything, old man," he shouted. He violently ripped the hanger away from me and shoved me hard with both hands flat against my chest. I fell backward helplessly onto the unforgiving concrete floor, terrible pain exploding through my hip and ribs like lightning striking. At 72 years old, with bones already significantly weakened by age and osteoporosis, I couldn't bounce back from serious falls like I used to in my younger days when I was strong and resilient. I lay there gasping and wheezing desperately, struggling hard to draw even a single breath into my bruised, aching lungs while Todd stood directly over me, breathing hard and glaring down with undisguised hatred. "You just made things so much worse for yourself, you stupid old fool," he hissed through tightly clenched teeth. He slammed the heavy door shut with enough violent force to rattle the entire frame and shake dust from the ceiling, and I heard him dragging something heavy and metallic against it from the outside. Another solid barrier between me and any possible chance of freedom or escape. Another nail in what he clearly hoped would become my coffin. The sharp, stabbing pain in my left side made every single breath absolute agony, and I suspected he'd cracked at least 2 of my ribs. Hours later, still aching terribly from the brutal fall and barely able to move my entire left side without screaming, I continued searching through the remaining boxes with just my one good arm. That's when I found it tucked away in a dusty corner behind some old paint cans, an old electronics box containing a silver flip phone that looked at least 10 years old, maybe older. My pulse quickened with renewed hope as I flipped it open with trembling, unsteady fingers, but the small screen stayed frustratingly dark and lifeless. Dead battery, completely drained of power. Still, hope flickered weakly in my chest like a guttering candle in strong wind. If I could somehow manage to charge it, find some way to get power to it, I could call for help, call the police, call literally anyone who might listen. But there were no electrical outlets anywhere down here in this unfinished basement space. Only that single bare bulb overhead that was hardwired directly into the ceiling junction box. I tucked the phone carefully under my thin blanket, my feverish mind racing desperately through possibilities and half-formed plans. Then Todd's voice drifted down clearly from directly upstairs, probably in the living room, and what I heard made my blood run ice cold in my veins and my stomach turn over. Todd was talking on his own phone, pacing restlessly back and forth above me in the living room. His voice carried clearly through the old, poorly constructed floorboards that had visible gaps between them. "She'll believe absolutely anything I tell her. Trust me on this. Once he's permanently out of the picture, everything's mine. The substantial trust fund her mother left her, this house, all of it." I pressed my ear flat against the ceiling, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. He wasn't just being cruel for cruelty's sake or having some kind of breakdown. He was coldly calculating, methodically planning my death. This was all carefully orchestrated, all about money and greed, about Stella's substantial inheritance from her mother Margaret. The house I'd helped her buy with $30,000 from my teacher's pension savings. The trust fund worth nearly $500,000 that Margaret had carefully built over decades. Suddenly, I understood with crystal clarity. Todd was actively, patiently waiting for me to die down here in this cold, damp basement. And then he'd play the perfect role of consoling, grieving husband while systematically taking everything Margaret and I had worked so hard to build for our daughter's future. The realization made me physically ill, but it also ignited something fierce and primal inside me. a determination to survive that I hadn't felt in years. By day 3 trapped in that basement prison, the relentless fever had weakened me so terribly I could barely lift my head off the concrete without the entire room spinning violently. My body shook with uncontrollable tremors that felt like seizures, and each breath came shallow and painful through what I was now certain were multiple cracked ribs. My lips were badly cracked and bleeding from severe dehydration, and my tongue felt swollen. Todd brought another tray of stale bread and lukewarm water, standing at the bottom of the stairs watching with cold satisfaction as I struggled to crawl slowly across the rough concrete toward it. The smirk never left his face as he observed my suffering with what looked like genuine enjoyment. "Not much longer now," he said under his breath, just barely loud enough for me to hear, as he turned to leave me alone again. The words confirmed absolutely everything. He was actively waiting, patiently counting down the hours until my weakened body gave out completely, until the combination of illness and starvation finished what he'd started by locking me down here. But he'd made one crucial, potentially fatal mistake in his careful planning. He'd severely underestimated what a father would endure, what incredible pain he'd push through to protect his child from a dangerous predator who'd infiltrated their family. That night, Stella's voice broke through my feverish haze like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man going under for the 3rd time. "Where's Dad? I haven't seen him around in several days now." My heart leaped with desperate hope that was almost painful. She was noticing my prolonged absence, finally questioning where I'd gone and why. I gathered what little strength remained in my weakened body and pounded on the water pipes again with the very last of my energy. But Todd's response was as smooth as silk, perfectly rehearsed and completely convincing. "He's resting in his room upstairs. That flu hit him pretty hard. You know how it is with older folks and their weak immune systems." I heard Stella sigh with genuine concern. "Poor Dad. I feel terrible I haven't checked on him. I'll definitely go see him tomorrow after work." Tomorrow. I just had to survive until tomorrow. Just had to hold on one more day. But then Todd said something else, his voice dropping lower and more intimate, meant only for Stella's ears. Something that made my stomach drop and my fragile hope crumble completely. "If you go in there, you'll catch it too, honey. Stay away for a few more days. Let him fight through it on his own." Todd's voice was gentle, genuinely concerned, the perfect imitation of a worried son-in-law. I heard him kiss Stella, heard her soft laugh as he distracted her skillfully with some amusing story about his day at work. She was falling completely for every calculated word, every manipulative gesture and touch. He was weaving an intricate web so carefully, so skillfully, that my own daughter trusted his version of reality more than she'd trust her own instincts about her father. Hot rage burned through my fever-racked body, giving me a surge of energy. I had to escape this basement prison before Todd convinced Stella I wasn't worth checking on at all, before he isolated her so completely from me that she'd accept any explanation for my eventual disappearance. That's when my eyes landed on the old metal fuse box mounted in the dark corner of the basement, and a desperate plan began forming in my clouded mind. The plan was incredibly risky and might make things worse, but I was rapidly running out of options and time. I dragged myself slowly across the concrete floor, every muscle screaming in protest, every movement sending fresh waves of pain through my battered body. The fuse box was ancient, its metal door hanging slightly ajar on rusted hinges. If I pulled the main breaker switch, the entire house would go dark instantly. Stella would have to come down to investigate, to check the fuse box. My fingers found the cold metal lever, shaking so badly I almost couldn't grip it. I took a deep breath that made my ribs scream and pulled hard. Instantly, the basement bulb went out, plunging me into complete darkness. Above me, Stella gasped loudly in surprise. Todd cursed violently, his voice sharp with anger. Footsteps rushed toward the basement door. It was working exactly as I'd hoped. But when the door flew open seconds later, the flashlight beam revealed Todd's absolutely furious face, not Stella's concerned one. My plan had backfired. Todd descended the stairs in 3 long, aggressive strides, his face contorted with rage in the flashlight's harsh beam. The flashlight clattered to the concrete floor as he grabbed my shirt with both hands and slammed me violently against the cold wall. "Do that again, and I'll make absolutely sure she never sees you alive." His fist connected hard with my already injured ribs, right where I'd hit the floor days before. White-hot pain exploded through my entire chest, so intense I couldn't breathe or cry out. My vision went dark at the edges. I couldn't draw air into my lungs no matter how hard I tried. He let me crumple to the ground like a discarded rag, gasping and wheezing desperately. "You're dying down here, old man. Accept it and stop fighting." But as he turned to storm back upstairs, breathing hard from exertion, I felt something slip from his jacket pocket during our violent struggle. Something small, cold, and metal that landed near my hand. Something that changed everything. When Todd's angry footsteps faded and the door slammed again, I slowly uncurled my trembling fist. In my palm lay a small, cold object that glinted in the dim light from the tiny window, the basement key. My heart pounded, so hard I thought it might burst right through my damaged ribs. He'd been so consumed by rage, so focused on hurting and intimidating me, that he hadn't noticed my hand slip into his pocket during the struggle. I clutched the key like it was made of solid gold, the most valuable thing I'd ever held, and slid it carefully under my blanket before he could return and discover what I'd taken. This was my real chance at escape, maybe my only chance. But timing would be absolutely everything. I needed Stella to see me before Todd realized what I'd done and stopped me. I had no idea he was already upstairs spinning his next elaborate lie to keep her away from me. From my position below the floorboards, I listened carefully as Todd fed Stella more carefully constructed poison. "Your dad's sleeping again. Haven't heard a sound from his room. Poor guy barely moves when I check on him every few hours." The lies flowed so smoothly from his mouth, it made me physically sick. This was clearly not his first time manipulating someone. Stella hesitated, her voice uncertain and guilty. "Maybe I really should check on him tomorrow after work. Make sure he's okay." My muscles tensed, every nerve on high alert. Tomorrow might be too late for me. But Todd just chuckled warmly, wrapping her in false comfort and reassurance. "No need, babe. I've got everything completely under control. He needs rest and quiet more than visitors right now. You know how cranky sick people get." I heard Stella agree reluctantly, heard their footsteps move toward the bedroom for the night. My window of opportunity was rapidly closing. I had to act tonight, had to make my move in the darkness, or I might not live to see another morning. Near midnight, when the house finally went completely quiet above me, I used the stolen key with shaking hands. My fingers were so weak and unsteady from fever that it took 3 attempts to fit the key properly in the lock. The click when it finally turned seemed impossibly loud in the heavy silence, like a gunshot echoing through the night. I crept up the stairs as quietly as possible, my body screaming with agony at every single step. The living room glowed with the television's blue light, some late-night show playing to an empty room. I could see down the hallway leading to Stella's bedroom, could see her door slightly ajar. Just a few more steps, and I'd reach her. My hand reached out toward her doorknob, freedom just inches away, when another hand suddenly grabbed my shoulder hard from behind. Todd had been waiting in the dark shadows, watching, expecting exactly this move. His grip was like iron as he viciously yanked me backward into the hallway. I lost my balance completely, my weak legs giving out, and I tumbled down the basement stairs in a horrifying rush. My hip cracked against the concrete at the bottom with a sickening sound, pain unlike anything I'd ever felt shooting through my entire body. I actually saw white light behind my eyes. Todd stood at the top of the stairs, breathing hard, his silhouette backlit by the hallway light. "You just don't know when to quit, old man. That's going to cost you." The door slammed with finality. The lock clicked back into place. But during our desperate struggle in the hallway, during that critical moment when he dragged me away from my daughter's room, I'd managed to grab something from his belt in a last act of defiance. His cell phone had clattered down the basement stairs with me, landing near my broken body. He hadn't noticed in his anger. I crawled painfully into the darkest corner, clutching my screaming hip, and flipped open Todd's phone with fingers that barely worked. "Please don't be password locked," I prayed to whatever God might be listening. The screen lit up brilliantly, miraculously unlocked. My shaking fingers found Stella's contact information and hit call before Todd could discover what I'd taken. It rang once, twice, each ring an eternity. "Hello." Her sleepy, confused voice was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard in my life. "Stella," I croaked, my voice barely a whisper, hoarse from days of screaming. "It's Dad. I'm in the basement. He locked me down here. I'm hurt. Heavy silence stretched for what felt like forever. Then her sharp intake of breath, the sound of sheets rustling as she sat up. Oh my God. Dad. What? Stay quiet and don't move. I'm coming right now. Right now. I heard her moving in her room above me. Minutes felt like hours as I waited in that corner, cradling my injured hip and trying not to make any sound. Then the basement door creaked open slowly, and light flooded down the stairs like salvation itself. Stella appeared at the top, her face pale with shock and horror. She rushed down the stairs and dropped to her knees beside me on the cold concrete. Dad? Oh my God! What did he do to you? Real tears streamed down her face as she saw the extensive bruises covering my arms, the way I cradled my ribs, my swollen hip, my feverish and dehydrated state. I tried to warn her, tried to tell her Todd would hear us and come, but heavy footsteps were already pounding down the stairs with frightening speed. Todd's shadow fell across us both, his face a twisted mask of fury and desperate panic. He'd woken up and heard us. He's lying to you, Todd shouted, his voice cracking with barely controlled panic. He's confused, delirious, sick. He doesn't know what he's saying. Old people get dementia. But Stella's eyes moved slowly from the fresh purple bruises covering my arms and face to the heavy lock still hanging on the open door. You did this, she whispered, her voice shaking with dawning horror and rage. You actually locked him down here. My father. You locked my father in the basement. Todd's carefully maintained mask crumbled completely. His hands clenched into tight fists, his face red. Everything I did was for us. For our future. He was getting in the way of everything. Can't you see that? Stella stood slowly, pulling her phone from her pajama pocket with trembling hands. Her fingers dialed 911 right in front of him, her eyes never leaving his face. Todd's face went completely white as he heard the operator answer. The sirens arrived within 10 minutes, filling the quiet neighborhood with noise, red and blue lights painting the basement walls in alternating colors. 2 police officers descended the stairs carefully, taking in the scene with professional assessment. Me on the floor, clearly beaten and sick, Stella crying and holding my hand, Todd trying desperately to explain and justify. But Stella's statement was clear, detailed, and utterly damning. She told them everything I'd told her, showed them the locked door, pointed out my injuries. The officers handcuffed Todd right there in that basement, reading him his rights while he protested his innocence and claimed I was senile. As they led him past me toward the stairs, he turned his head, his eyes filled with pure, undiluted hatred. You've ruined everything, he hissed at me through clenched teeth. I met his gaze steadily despite my pain. No, Todd, you did this to yourself. But my revenge was only just beginning. I had plans. For months later, in late May, I sat in the courtroom beside Stella, my hip still aching from that final terrible fall down the stairs. The doctors said it would probably never fully heal at my age. Todd's expensive lawyer tried every possible angle. I was confused, senile, imagining persecution, exaggerating everything. But the evidence was absolutely overwhelming and irrefutable. Hospital records showing my extensive injuries, photos of the bruises, x-rays of my cracked ribs and fractured hip. The recording of my desperate call to Stella. My testimony, delivered in the steady, clear voice I'd used for 40 years of teaching, laid out every single moment of those 3 days in careful detail. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning. When they filed back in, the forewoman's voice was clear and strong, guilty on all counts of unlawful imprisonment, assault, and attempted murder. Todd's face crumbled as the judge prepared to read his sentence. Stella squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. 20 years in state prison without possibility of parole for 10 years, the judge declared, his voice echoing through the packed courtroom with absolute authority. Todd's head dropped forward onto the defense table. Stella squeezed my hand even harder, tears of relief and vindication running down her face unchecked. I should have seen it sooner, should have protected you, she whispered brokenly. I told her exactly what I'd told my students for 4 decades. People like Todd are experts at hiding their true nature, at manipulation and deception. It wasn't her fault. As we left the courtroom, passing Todd being led away in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit, his eyes found mine one last time. I couldn't help but smile slightly. He'd locked me in that basement thinking I was too old, too weak, too sick to fight back or survive. But he'd forgotten something important, something I'd learned teaching rowdy teenagers. The strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire. The basement didn't break me, Todd, I said quietly as we walked into the bright sunlight. It built my revenge. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.